Well, good morning. And it says it's starting up, so I'm going to wait until my computer tells me I'm all linked in and starting. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy Saturday morning. So, hopefully, I'm live. We'll find out um, afterwards how this worked out. So, I want to spend this morning just sort of orienting you to what I'm doing, where we're going, Saturday mornings, various aspects of things. Um, I'm going to be moving into the internet. I'm already in the internet, I've already moved, but I'm going to be expanding my work in the internet. And that has implications for families, for everybody, for everything moving forward. And up until now, I've been using primarily text based. I've been on my blog, my website, and Facebook, posting text based material on Facebook. And that's for a reason. A lot of documentation stuff I've been doing up until this point. I'm not doing documentation anymore because I've got pretty much everything I need. So now I'm moving into the next phase, which is more active. I've been released from some of the inactivity necessary for documentation. And the internet is way powerful on video material. So YouTube and something like this, Facebook Live. YouTube, I mean, the internet is incredibly powerful in that regard. And towards that, let me just orient you a little bit because everybody's familiar with me in the family courts, but oh my goodness, I had a life before I entered here. And if you look at my Vita, you can kind of track it back. Early childhood background. I've got two different diagnostic systems, two different treatment systems for kids 0 to 5 with attachment pathology. I've worked schizophrenia and delusional disorders. You can see that back there. ADHD in the schools. I was over there for a while. But I started my doctorate level stuff. I had master's degree as well going back earlier. But with my doctor's level, I started with internet psychology because the internet had just come online right about that time and it was emerging. And I could see the, as an early childhood guy with intersubjectivity and how the brain works and various things, the internet captures certain social features of our brain, intersubjectivity basically, mildly in a odd way, but it's going to capture us psychologically. And so uh, my initial dissertation topic was I wanted to do parent training using the internet. And I think it sets up extremely well for doing that parent training using the internet. Unfortunately, Pepperdine's IRB, Institutional Review Board, that approves all research, didn't know what to do with the internet. They didn't know how to evaluate my proposal because the internet's new. So I shifted over, and my dissertation became internet psychology, defining all of the various facets of internet psychology and how it's going to be emerging. So, therapy, education, assessment, professional development. I had like 4 areas I expanded on. And then I became very active in the early phases of internet psychology. If you go way to the back of my Vita, you'll see that I was getting World Health Organization invites and American Academy for the Advancement of Science or Association for the Advancement of Science and OPRR, which is the IRB people. You know, they invited me back to do a paper on ethical issues of online interventions. And one of the important aspects of that, just to recognize, if you look back, I've been in ethics ever since I've joined the doctoral ranks. Okay, that's been ethics in online intervention. I've taught the law and ethics course at a graduate level, so I know ethics really well. And that's what I'm pounding over here because there's multiple ethical violations in forensic psychology. Yes, all over the place. It's a cesspool in the family courts. So I see people saying hello this morning. Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. Um, so uh, I have a life actually before. coming into the family courts. And a lot of it is internet psychology. I like internet psychology. And I'm a internet psychologist. I feel I'm one of the first who is actively using the internet as a therapeutic medium. Some people, online therapy, I'm not a big fan of online therapy. I don't do it necessarily. I don't think the medium lends itself to the type of work I do. You can shift it over to CBT kinds of stuff, different avenues that will work very well. Psychoanalytic stuff might work really well here, but just not the type of work I do that's more um, interactive. I'm in your brain essentially. I'm working brain systems. I'm a neurodevelopmental kind of therapy guy from out of early childhood. So I'm working your attachment systems, emotion regulation systems, identity systems, various systems. And I can't do that this way. I need to be in the room and connected into some of your systems. So but but there's a lot of people right now that are moving into the internet looking at how to use it as a medium. Mostly what I'm seeing is it's informational content. Informational content's going up on YouTube, or um, they're using it for professional development, saying, "Look how much I know. I'm an expert." One of the things about psychologists, we're not allowed to advertise, okay, because we're working with a vulnerable population. That's what it's considered. And so we're not allowed to advertise into them because we can exploit their vulnerability. But one of the ways we are allowed to advertise, sort of, is we go out and do talks. We go out. So what I was doing back in my day was I was going around to preschools, and so I was do talks on parenting in the preschools, and I would do those free for various preschools, and then I'd leave my cards in the back and little brochures and stuff, and then they would get a hold of me, and that's how you build your practice. Is you go out and do talks on your expertise, eating disorders or behavior problems, whatever it might be. And so I see a lot of that happening, where a lot of professionals, especially on Facebook, they're using Facebook a lot to present their expertise about the various topic areas, hopefully to generate some business for them. YouTube is more informational content. They're giving a lot of information, but it's like reading a book, but it's verbal kind of stuff. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a clinical internet psychologist. I'm looking to use this medium, the various mediums we have, as intervention techniques to actually change things in the world using the internet. It's a asynchronous communication. I can't talk to you back and forth. However, I kind of know what the questions you're going to ask. I kind of know the issues you're going to, because it's pattern, the pathology's pattern. So we can actually have almost a proto dialogue about what to do. It's just I have to be very careful. I can't develop duty of care over anybody. I have to be very careful in what I say. It's dangerous for me out here right now. But I think I'm going to be safe. I think I can navigate. One of the reasons is I'm an old guy. I've worked in every possible position, from community clinics to NIMH research to having my own clinic, with 3 universities involved. So, and I've been in private practice and, you know, all sorts of situations, settings. And I've worked with nearly every pathology: autism, ADHD, trauma, schizophrenia, just pretty much everything. Selective mutism. Uh, about the only thing, the areas would be substance abuse. I've worked with substance abuse. I'd want a substance abuse counselor if I'm going to work substance abuse, because that's a specialty I'm not interested in. I've worked it, I know it, and I'm not interested. The other is eating disorders. Again, I've worked with eating disorders, but I'd want to get a psychologist in who specializes in eating disorders. Pretty much, other than that, combat vets, I would be I'm about 95% on combat vets, and I need to boost a little bit on that. But other than that, I pretty much have worked with and know every pathology. One of the implications of that is that competence for doctors, and this is what I was trained to at Children's Hospital, is competence is knowing everything there is to know about the pathology and then reading journals to stay current. So when I'm working with Keith Nectarline on schizophrenia, the expectation is everybody on that project knows everything about schizophrenia and is reading journals to stay current. Now that's hard, but somebody like Keith, who's head, does know everything like it. I'm working with Jim Swanson down in UCI, his MTA team. Right after they finished the MTA study, they brought me on board because they wanted to go early childhood on ADHD. They couldn't because they didn't have the competence on their team. So they brought in me as an early childhood psychologist with background in ADHD so that they could move into the preschool age range. Um, and so uh, I've worked with a variety of pathologies. And over in Jim's project, the again, the expectation is that everybody on that project, Steve Simpson, the psychologist, and just everybody on that project knows everything there is to know about ADHD and is reading journals to stay current, at least the upper level staff. Um, and Jim Swanson, oh my goodness, he knows stuff. He was the first one that introduced me to the possible genetic involvement of Neanderthal genes in ADHD. It helps us wander a little bit or something. He gave me a journal article that cites that perhaps some of the ADHD impulsivity hyperactivity is related to the Neanderthal genes. And that was back early 2000s. That was great reading about Neanderthal genes in a research article. And that's the expectation, though. If you're working in the field, you know everything. Jim can talk about all the molecular stuff, and he's a psychologist, but he knows all the biomedical stuff. So that's the expectation out there. And that becomes important relative to me because I've worked with schizophrenia, I've worked with ADHD, I've worked with autism, I've worked with childhood trauma and child abuse. I know everything there is to know about those autism. I know everything there is to know about autism, at least when I was working with it. ADHD, I've kind of stayed current. I've been over here in the family courts. Trauma, I know everything about trauma. And I've been busy over here in the family courts, so I'm probably 98%, but I'm paying attention to stuff. And so I know a lot of stuff. And I'm a clinical psychologist. I know assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. FEMA and the Department of Justice needed to develop an assessment model for juvenile fire setters in the family courts for a variety of reasons. They're dangerous people. The placements don't want to take juvenile fire setters because of liability issues. But the court needed to know whether we send this 12-year-old who set a fire, whether we need to send them on a juvenile justice path or whether we need to send them on a mental health path. And they didn't know. So they hired a team to develop a mental health assessment protocol. The team consisted of Ken Feynman, who was the juvenile fire setter expertise. He's a world-renowned expert in juvenile fire setting, just top. And he was in Orange County, where we were located. And so they brought him on board for that expertise. But he was a forensic psychologist. So his expertise is not in assessment. It's in the court-involved psychology. So they brought me in as the clinical psychologist to do the assessment protocol side. So I took his knowledge, put it into an assessment protocol, and I have it up as an example of my work product. And so we worked on that for a couple of years and produced a national model for an assessment protocol for juvenile fire setting in the family courts. And so I've already developed an assessment protocol for the family courts for juvenile pathology in the family courts. Now, if you look at that assessment, it's very complicated. I've got a child interview, a semi-structured child interview, a semi-structured parent interview with all sorts of coding factors, looking at all sorts of factors that then combine into the summary sheet with all the different motivations possible for the juvenile fire setting. You add a couple of outside measures documenting the concerns about the child's symptoms, that sort of thing. And so we got that protocol. Now, when I came over here, if I needed a more intensive assessment protocol, I create a more intensive assessment protocol. It's not needed over here. Once you work out what the pathology is, there are 3 symptoms that will absolutely 100% identify it all the time and will never misidentify it. In fact, each one of those symptoms will do it on its own. I gave you three because I know you kind of assessment people will be a little insecure about just making a diagnosis on one symptom alone because you're not competent yet. So I gave you all three because if one's there, all three is going to be there. And all three are impossible symptoms. They never show up anywhere in pathology. You never see a child reject a normal range parent. Never, ever, ever. You never see narcissistic personality pathology in a child. Never, never, never. Narcissistic pathology is an adult pathology. In childhood, it's attachment trauma. You never ever see a specific phobia, parent phobia, mother phobia, or father phobia. That's neurologically would be not possible. Children who reject parents get eaten by predators. A phobia gets removed from the gene pool. So that's not a possible symptom. That doesn't exist anywhere. And delusional disorder. Number three, the child shows a persecutory delusion towards a normal range parent. Again, that's impossible. Children do not develop persecutory delusions towards a normal parent. And if it's an abnormal parent, it's not delusional. They're an abnormal parent. So all of those symptoms on the diagnostic checklist are impossible symptoms. Yet all three or four will be present with this court-involved pathology. So all you have to do is just say the mental health person, check, check, check. Is that present or absent? It's not an assessment. It's just like asking the question, is the child rejecting a normal range parent? Yes or no? Maybe. That's your three options. Yes, no, partially. And is the child showing these five symptoms of narcissism? Yes, no, possibly. Or is the child showing yes, no, possibly? That's not an assessment. That's just asking the question and documenting your response. You can write the answer on a napkin if you want. But it's what I gave in the diagnostic checklist is just a structured way to do that, primarily so for research, because what it is, it's the operational definition for the pathology that can then be used on the research, and you add your independent variables and your dependent variables to that. But you have an operational definition for what the pathology is. And so that's what the diagnostic checklist is. And with that, I get nothing about this pathology is Dr. Childress, at least ABPA. Nothing that I describe in ABPA is Dr. Childress. I know a lot more than I've talked about in ABPA, attachment-based parental alienation model. I know a lot more. I could be telling you a lot more. But that will just get us into fighting about Dr. Childress has a new theory. Is Dr. Childress? No, I don't want to fight. We need to end the fighting. And so I'm giving you, that was what the fighting was about. Gardner people gave a new form of pathology. The standard people said, no, you need to define it within established pathology. So I come along and say, okay, well, let's define it within established pathology. Let's meet their criteria. So I did. So there's no new theory here. It's Bowlby, Minuchin, Beck, and beyond. And so we need to bring that fight to a close. So if I add anything that I know about the pathology, then everybody's going to start fighting about Dr. Childress. So we have to bring that to a close. So I didn't use any knowledge of my own. I only used the knowledge that is publicly available in the scientific literature. Except I gave you 12 associated clinical signs right at the end of the diagnostic checklist, 12 associated clinical signs. These will not always be there. They won't always be there, but frequently. Dorsey, in her CRM, custody resolution method data compilations, is finding that about 6 to 8 of these associated clinical signs are present when the three diagnostic indicators are present. Number 3 and number 4, the exclusion demand and the parental replacement, in my view, are almost always 100% diagnostic of the pathology. If you have associated clinical sign 3, the exclusion event, or a 4, the parental replacement, that's going to be almost diagnostic. I would say diagnostic. I don't have the research yet on it. Collect the data. Find out. I betcha that those two will always be associated with pathology. Um, but I wanted to give you those because one thing, look at me, I'm an old guy. Okay, so I figure I've got about 5 years of active shelf life left. I've got 67 now, puts me about 72. So, family history, I might be leaving around that, 72 to 76 probably. I doubt I'll make it into the 80s. So I've got a short shelf life here. And you people are so slow on the uptake that I'm going to be gone before you ever get your feet under you on this. So I'm leaving you a lot of stuff written wise that you can go back and mine for additional information once you care. Um, Two things on that. One is the reason you're so slow. The reason we're behind is because of the Gardnerian PA experts, and I put that on Bill Burnett particularly, but the whole group, the whole cadre of them. They're fringe professionals. I will be making the argument that the whole Gardner PAS model was a creation of the pathology, as was forensic psychology. They are both products of the pathology. They're symptom features. I'll be making that argument. And the role of the Gardner's PAS is to degrade the quality of professional practices over here by this new pathology proposal so that no one's applying actual knowledge, and to lock everyone up in fighting all the time forever. Fighting and fighting and fighting. Is it parental alienation? Is it not? And because there's no diagnostic criteria to it that's established and agreed to, everybody fights. So look what's happening now. I've got a fight with the Gardnerian people, Bill Burnett and Amy Baker and uh, Jennifer Harmon, Karen Woodall, Gottlieb, Lorandas, all of them. Okay. I have to argue and fight with them to put parental alienation aside so we can actually use established knowledge and solve this. But now look, I'm distracted. I'm over here fighting and fighting and fighting. I should be focused on the forensic psychologist, which is where the real action is. We need to, forensic psychology is a failed experiment in service delivery. No other pathology has their own special psychologists. Not autism, not ADHD, not trauma, not nobody else. You get your own special psychologist who, wow, don't diagnose or treat the pathology they work with. Lucky you. And you don't have a choice in them because the clinical psychologists have abandoned you because you're too dangerous. And that's the fundamental issue. It's dangerous over here. So the clinical psychologist left. They gave you your own special psychologist and they gave them carte blanche to do whatever they want to protect you. It's a passive aggressive things out of clinical psychology. So I'll be addressing that. Maybe my next APA presentation in 2 years is I'm not going to present on court stuff. I'll be presenting on forensic psychology being a product of the pathology, as is Gardner's PAS. Okay, that's designed to keep us locked forever into battle. So, so that's one element. The Gardnerian PAS experts should have, this moment they know I have the solution and I've cracked it, they should have been promoting me into the mental health system, said, hey, Dr. Childress has this, and we should have joined forces and been moving towards the solution. They have a journal, American Journal of Family Therapy, and it peer reviewed. That's the stupid part of peer review. All these people, peer reviewed research, peer reviewed. They have a peer reviewed journal. They just peer review themselves and they just agree with them deviant belief system. And so peer review means nothing. It has to do with research methodology and stuff. It's a whole different application. Nobody peer reviews content. You want a peer review of ABPA. People say, where's the peer review of Dr. Childress? Read Foundations, write your peer review. There it is. Okay, I'm the one who generated the information. It's your responsibility to peer review it. So you want peer review it. Where's the research? This is not research. Okay, this is applying knowledge to pathology. So Minuchin, you want the research on Minuchin? You want the research on Bowlby? You want the research on personality disorders? Really? It's there. I got the whole list of 40 pages of references. But that's stupid. This is not peer-reviewed research. This is applying knowledge to pathology. It's diagnosis. Gardner Richard Gardner, that's what he did. He skipped the step of diagnosis. And instead of remaining within the rigors of professionalism, he exempted himself and said, I can create a whole new pathology just of my own and my own symptoms and everything else. No, you can't. Okay, that's not, no. That's moving off the path of professionalism. We diagnose and we treat. Treatment for cancer is different from treatment for diabetes. What's the diagnosis? If he had stayed within the rigor, it would have worked out as a shared delusional disorder, shared persecutory delusion. That's the pathology, a shared persecutory delusion. But everybody goes off running to their new pathology proposals, and nobody, because no one's competent in delusional disorders over here. That's the reason. Delusional disorders are found in schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. They're not found in the child stuff, except here. Okay, so no one's competent in delusional disorders. No one's competent in attachment pathology here, and so it's a nightmare. So I'll be describing all of that. But I'm running out of time. I only have till about 8:30, and then I have to head on off. I do Tai Chi, and so I have a class after this. So every Saturday morning, I'm going to drop on in, show up with me, and I'll just talk about whatever suits my fancy at that point in time. One of the things that this will be prelude to will be coming into my YouTube channel. So I'm going to be coming onto YouTube channel, and we'll be expanding a lot. I have my list of the video titles I have, and so currently, you see, I have the category and then a set of video titles under each category, and right now I have about 4 pages of things just to get me going. So for example, I have forensic psychology. I have about 7 of those listed up. I'll do for forensic. Gardnerian PAS. I'll start with 2, but we'll see how far we go. Family law attorneys. I have about 10 of those. The family law attorneys are going to be an interesting discussion. So I'll be talking about treatment, not custody, so how we shift around. The child abuse diagnosis, clinical diagnostic assessment. I'll be explaining that for attorneys, what they want, what they're looking for. The zealous advocate role. We'll be having a discussion about that in one of my video segments. My specialized expertise and how to bring me into a court. My consultation, I can consult using the internet. So I'm sitting there with you. I can be in any office anywhere. So that's where this is moving a lot. It is second opinion through telehealth. And so I'm going to initiate that, a second opinion through telehealth, and get that established. But then once I do a second opinion, that person can be a second opinion for someone else. It's called building capacity. So we're going to be building capacity. I'm going to seed it, and then it's going to move up, and then I'm going to die, leave, and you guys can carry on with the mutual support. In order to end the fight around this, we have to go in as pairs. So the psychologists have to give 2 diagnoses, one primary and then the second opinion confirmation of that diagnosis that will give the court the reassurance that it's, and if the third party wants to add a third psychologist, let's add a third one if that's what it needs to end the fight and get a diagnosis that reaches a treatment plan. Now, we couldn't do that in the 1980s and stuff because we didn't have the internet. And so getting a second opinion is really involved, nor did we have the standardized approach like a shared persecutory delusion or cross-generational coalitions, established knowledge to get a second opinion on. Now we have the internet. I can be sitting in your office and giving you a second opinion on stuff. And we have an established model, ABPA, delusional disorder, family systems, complex trauma. We can apply established knowledge to reach a consensus diagnosis for the court. And so that's where we'll be headed on a lot of this. It will be the second opinion consultation. I'll talk with attorneys about that. Cross-examining mental health testimony. That should be interesting. So I'm going to talk about how to tell attorneys how to go about cross-examining the mental health testimony they get. Mental status exam of thought and perception, another interesting one to talk with attorneys about. To get a delusion, to diagnose a delusion, we don't diagnose delusions based on history. We pop them out during the session. And then we look at them, we can turn them around, look at all their features, we put them back in, close them up. And so we actually see the delusion in our session. And if I'm ever court ordered to do an assessment of this, I request a court reporter to document everything, because I'm going to be pulling the delusion out and looking at all its features, looking at it, and popping it back in. And that will all be documented for the judge. And then I can explain, up, see right here, that right there, right there, right there. And so we actually take it out in the session. Problem is, none of these mental health people know how to do a mental status exam upon perception. They're incompetent. So none of them are doing it. None of them know it's a delusion. None of them know what the delusion is. And so I'll be explaining how to do that. Interesting feature about a mental status exam, though, is it's based on linear questioning, linear logical reasoning. And with a thought disorder, the mental status exam moves on this linear line to the conclusions. For normal thought, we follow evidence to reach our conclusion. For a thought disorder, starts with the conclusion as fixed. That is a fixed outcome. And then the evidence is constructed to match the conclusion. And so if you're following a linear line to reach the conclusion, you're going to find a place where it does not make sense. There's a little gap in the logic, there's a gap in the reasoning, because they're not following the reasoning they've already got the conclusion fixed, and this is all constructed. So when you find that piece, that's what you're looking for. You're going down a linear line to find that thought disorder piece where it goes a little associational thinking, it's called, a little conceptual disorganization. Boop. And then that's your place. So I'll explain that to attorneys. Now, what you do on that, because the person is the pathological person, their responses with this pathology are what context dependent. So if I put them in one context, they're going to say what seems like the most beneficial thing to say in that context. And so they'll give me a statement and answer to this Now, if I put them in a different context, they'll give me a different answer that's incompatible with the other one. Fits with this context, but is contradictory to what they told me before. The moment I get that, I then put the two contradictory statements together and say, ask them to resolve that for me. There's your thought disorder. Boop, those two don't make sense together. And then they're going to start to go, they'll get a little angry. They'll start to say, I didn't say that. And then you have them reading back the record and say, yes, you did. You said exactly that. They'll go into conceptual disorganization. First, you collapse it into the denial. I never said that. If you stay on it, you will collapse them into a mild dissociative state. I'm confused. I didn't know, those sorts of things. I recommend at that point, if you really want to carry it, you write down the question and you give it to them and let them look at the question. Because I'm confused, I don't understand. There it is, simple question. You said this, those two don't fit. How do you make them fit? And they'll just go blank. You'll see that, like dissociative state out of them. So I think attorneys will be interested in mental status exam, learning a little bit about that. Working with Dr. Childress, another one on. I have about 12 on treatment, various aspects of treatment that you people like. I got a whole category on who's what. I'm going to be going around through all of the people. I've been here 10 years. I know everybody. I've been around them. I'm going to go through and say who's in our, like Sesame Street, who's in our neighborhood. Okay, so I'll do one on Dorsey. I'll take a look at her Vita and talk about Dorsey, but I'll talk about Bill Burnett and I'll talk about the Gardnerian people. I'll take a look at Linda Gottlieb's, and she has a new treatment program. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's look at Linda's Vita, and let's take a look at what her program is. Now, I'm going to need to be extremely careful with that, but I will be. Okay, so I'm going to be neutral. I'm going to be coming up and just giving you what's there and letting you decide on the situation. I'll talk about forensic psychologists, custody evaluators. Those are interesting. I'm planning to go through like a walkthrough of a custody evaluation, how it's structured. They do their opening stuff, and then they do their interviews with mom and dad and all the kids, and then they do their testing, and then they do their conclusions. So I'll walk through all of that, describing where the vulnerabilities are on ethics, on malpractice, on lines of questions for them in each of those segments, because that's a thought disordered process too. the forensic evaluations, $20,000 to $40,000 for 6 to 9 months. I can bring in a clinical diagnostic assessment for around $2,500 in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, $2,500 for a clinical diagnostic assessment. For second opinion, kick it up to $5,000. $5,000, 6 weeks for clinical diagnostic assessment will return a diagnosis and a treatment plan for the family, an accurate diagnosis and an effective treatment plan for the family. 6 weeks, $25,000, 2 opinions. Forensic psychology can do a custody evaluation in 6 to 9 months for $20,000 to $40,000 without a second opinion and without the application of knowledge. It gives you no diagnosis for a treatment plan. So we would still need a second diagnostic assessment to get a diagnosis for the treatment plan. So basically, the custody evaluations are irrelevant. What's going to happen as I explain this to people is everybody's going to want the clinical diagnostic assessment, because at 6 weeks, it gives you an answer, and it's an answer that you can put into practice and protect the child and solve the situation, get the proper treatment. Versus 6 to 9 months, that gives you no diagnosis, and you still need a diagnosis for the treatment plan. The courts are going to look and say, we want a clinical diagnostic assessment to answer our question of what's going on. Parents are going to say, I want a clinical diagnostic assessment to identify the pathology in this other parent. No one's going to be asking for the forensic custody evaluations. It's a supply and demand thing. If the demand for forensic evals go down to zero and there's a new demand for clinical assessments, money's over here, no money's over here, the psychologists will migrate. We don't want the forensic migrating. They're awful. The forensic psychologists are the worst imaginable, and for a variety of reasons. So we're actually going to replace them with the clinical people. We got to get the clinical people back, but we need to make it safe for them, which is my job. So that's what I've done. I'll explain all of this going forward. There's a little note I just saw. Will I talk about guardians ad litem? Yes, I will. I'm going to have, in addition to, this is going to be Dr. Childress Discusses. And so I have family law attorneys, who's what. I'll go through Vita series and stuff. Solution series. I have a whole thing on solutions. Parenting. I'm going to go through a whole thing on parenting, a bunch of content on parenting. Court-involved clinical psychology, a deep dive, and then my practice, and maybe a couple others going forward. So I'm going to have a whole content base, but this is one half. The other half is Dr. Childress answers your questions. So I'm just going to start taking questions, and I'm going to answer them in video clips. Dr. Childress answers questions. Oh, just questions. One of the questions, like child therapists, I'm going to have that's my first one coming out. I'm going to tell you about child therapists. I'm going after their license. I'm waiting until after the forensic people. Once I get some ground on the forensic people, I'm going to do a quick turn on the child individual psychologists and therapists, and going after their license for being child abusers, for being incompetent child abusers. They've misdiagnosed the delusional disorder, and they are helping to construct the delusion in the child because of their ignorance, incompetence, and unethical practices. So I'm going after the individual child therapist. I'm just not doing it first. I'm going after the forensic people first. I'm going to cut them off at the knees into forensic psychology, and then I'm twirling back on the individual ones. There is pretty much no need for an individual therapist with this pathology. The parenting coordinators, GAL, all of that group of associated people, again, are entirely unnecessary. When I talk with the solutions in the family courts, I will be discussing more about an amicus attorney role, and I'll be following into that more. And so I got to run now because I got to do my stuff. But every Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, I'm going to hop on, and I'm going to give you about half an hour of just talking at you. The YouTube channels, I've got them coming forward. I'm working with a video person to put together the opening title sequences, because I got to keep all this organized. So I'm going to organize you with visual titles and keep it organized as to which playlist you're on, which line of information you're on based on the visuals. So I have that being put up right now. I'm going to start filming content. I've got the camera and the whole little studio set up right over there. For the YouTubes, I'm going to film them up. I'm hoping to get 2 YouTubes up a week, one on the weekend, one midweek, for about the next year. So I'll get up like 100 content up on my YouTube channel, and that's just going to stay there. It's going to stay there now and forever, and that'll serve as a nice foundation for things. And so that will be coming along with this video, Facebook Live every Saturday. And so a lot of information is going to be, and resources are going to be coming at you over the next year, 2 years, that you'll be able to use. Because I'm an internet psychologist. One of the things psychology doesn't realize is everything's changed. All of your conferences that we used to go to, and you travel to Chicago to go to the APA conference, those are pointless. We can have virtual conferences now. Okay? And you say, Dr. Childress, let's get you presenting to a group of judges about what the solution is. Great. That would be great. Get me presenting to a group of judges. I can do it virtually. Just put together get me a group of attorneys, or get me a group of mental health people. No problem. I'll come talk to you virtually. Now, in addition, though, I can just put up the content and you can look at it whenever you want. It doesn't need to be at a specific conference in a particular way. I'll just put the content up on YouTube and then you can watch it. The whole construct of these professional conferences that began in the 1800s, when you had to get the scientists all together to talk, is irrelevant in cyberspace. And so everything's shifting around. So I'm an internet psychologist. I'm coming to cyberspace. I'm going to take out YouTube and Facebook, and let's see what these communication medium can do. I'm going to try to use them as an intervention, not as informational resource. So much of the information I talk about will become time limited and dated, and 10 years from now, it's not relevant. And as I close off, going back to that 10 years, it's not relevant. What grieves me deeply, is that we have lost about at least 5 years, I would say 10, because of the failure of Bill Burnett and the Gardnerian PAS experts to come and collaborate with me and provide the support in creating the solution. They wanted to be the experts. It was a personal thing. They don't want Dr. Childress to get credit. They want Bill wants PAS of Gardner to be the one that's a victory on this. And so he has purposely not promoted me, purposely not cited me, purposely got his whole collective of people to give no support to Dr. Childress, no citation support, not bring me in it. And my opinion is it has cost us 10 years. That we would be so much further along now if they had given me access to the journal, if they had been citing me, if they'd been bringing me. So I will put the last 10 years of no solution and all the children we lost directly on the footsteps of Karen Woodall, Bill Burnett, Demosthenes Lorandos, Jennifer Harmon, Amy Baker, all of them. I will put that all at their feet. I will have video segments where I describe it. I will probably have APA presentations where I describe how they were a symptom feature of the pathology. As I close up here, I'm going to be late to Tai Chi. As I close up here, we need to end the fight in the courts. That's not productive around the child. We need to come to a single voice that reaches a single answer for the child. This is child abuse. This is spousal abuse, using the child as a weapon. This needs to stop, and it needs to stop today, not 10 years, not 5 years, not next week. It needs to stop today. I'm out of foster care and child abuse. This has driven me absolutely insane for 10 years that we have active child abuse and active spousal abuse, and no one is stopping it because everybody's locked up in this stupid argument about parental alienation rather than applying the established knowledge. It's a shared delusional disorder. So if you got a question and answer with Bill Burnett or any of them, ask them how many times have they diagnosed the child psychological abuse diagnosis. And for Bill, why isn't he telling people about the shared delusional disorder? He is spreading medical misinformation by talking about parental alienation. Parental alienation was fully reviewed in 2013 by the DSM-5 committee, the American Psychiatric Association. I was watching it happen, watching Bill present all his information to the DSM-5 committee. They totally rejected it. Fully, completely rejected PAS as a construct. That's a done deal now for every professional. There is no such thing as parental alienation since 2013. Done. Except for Bill and his fringe group of professionals who, by continuing to maintain this, degrade the quality of services in professional psychology and are offering the public medical psychiatric misinformation. And so, no, drinking bleach will not cure COVID. And that's essentially what Bill Burnett and the cadre of fringe professionals are telling parents. Drink bleach and it will cure your parental alienation. No, it won't. You need a proper diagnosis. That's a shared delusional disorder. We need quality standards. Ethical standards, standard 2.04, to apply the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline is mandatory. It is required. Ethical practice is not optional. Okay? And parental alienation is not the established scientific and professional knowledge. If you want to come up with a new pathology proposal, do it after you apply the established knowledge, after you fulfill your ethical obligations. Not instead of, not before. Ethical standards apply to all of us, or they apply to none of us. Bill Burnett and his group would have them apply to no one. I will have them apply to everyone, because I need the forensic psychologist to reach a baseline level of standard all over the place, which is the ethics code. The APA ethics code is baseline. I'm not the ceiling, I'm the floor. Once we get that, we just keep going to the best possible. The court is making momentous decisions about these children. Their lives depend on the court's decision. This could potentially be child abuse one way or the other. If the court makes a wrong decision, they're participating in the abuse of the child. That the court needs the best information out of psychology, not the worst. And right now they're getting the worst. And these children, in my view, all the time, children deserve the best possible care. They're so vulnerable. Their lives hang in the balance of our knowledge. There is no excuse for lazy. There is no excuse for ignorance if you're working with children. If you want to be ignorant and lazy, go work with somebody else. Don't work with kids. Their whole life course depends on your knowledge and your application of that knowledge. And so ethical standards apply to everyone. And then we'll just keep moving it up. Bill Burnett, they want to degrade the quality of things, so I'm going to have to do peer line-by-line review of their proposals and spend all this time knocking them out, focused on them, when I should be focused on the forensic psychologist, which is exactly the role the Gardnerians play in the pathology. They distract and create the conflict and create everything is forever in conflict so that we can never solve anything. We can never hold the forensic people accountable. We need to hold them accountable for knowledge and the application of knowledge. The moment we do that, we can get standards, and we continue to move on. So that's the course I'm taking. I figure, oh wow, this is Facebook Live. This is a nice little medium. So let's hop on board every Saturday morning. I will continue my Facebook posts. My Facebook posts, I consider my Facebook posts fluff. Okay, they're the current edge. They are documented. I know they're going somewhere, so I'm giving you valuable information. I'm even giving you dissertations, okay? 3, 4, 5 years in the road, students can come back, pull my Facebook page, and you can actually look. I post in several different categories. You'll see I post specifically about the pathology. I post specifically about social issues. I present neutral, sometimes just memes, boop, and with no content associated with it. And so I have various categories that I post in that you can kind of organize to and look at the responses to the various categories. And they look at responses over time and things in various social contexts and how I'm doing things. As a psychologist, I have three obligations. My first obligation is to the client. They own me. Second obligation is to society. Third is to myself. I'm number 3 on that list. So if I've got dinner plans, anniversary with my wife, and we're going out to a play and dinner, and I get a suicidal patient that calls me, sorry, honey, you have to go on to the dinner and the play alone. I've got to hospitalize a suicidal patient. My first obligation is to that patient. Second is to society. And so we have a duty to warn obligations, and we have an obligation to society. That is where I'm operating at this point relative to Dr. Brené and the PAS people, is that they are, in my view, a public health safety risk. They are providing misinformation to the public. They are degrading the quality of professional psychology offered to the courts. And they are locking the entire field up in an unproductive fight that solves nothing and has solved nothing for 40 years. It has been demonstrably a failure. And so it's time to move on, and they won't move on. So I gotta address those issues. Then I can address the forensic psychology issues, which is the real issue. We need to kill forensic psychology. We need to bring clinical people back. Those are DBT therapists primarily, court adapted, emotionally focused therapy. They won't come back because it's too dangerous over here. And so we have to solve that dangerousness issue for them so we can get the actual clinical psychologists back and get rid of this awful forensic psychology people. So with that, I'm going to say hello to everybody. I see you, saying hi to me. I'm never going to answer any questions in the side thing because that's too dangerous for me. If I get answering you, then there's duty of care and all sorts of stuff, and so I better just stay this way. But going forward, I have a email where you can email me questions. Going forward, this is one page. This is Dr. Childress Discusses. That's going to be this aspect. The other half is Dr. Childress Answers Your Questions. And I'll answer any of your questions. You can ask about this pathology, autism, ADHD. You got a question, I'll answer it. So you can send it to me, and I'll just start picking them off. Boom, film up a little thing, get them over to my assistant Maggie. She'll do the little post-production stuff on it, and then she'll be responsible for getting up 2 of them a week. And so I'll just film up a bunch of content, move them over to her, and she'll be putting them up. And so that's the plan going forward out of Dr. Childress. And I got so much more to talk to you about. But I got to run because, oh my goodness, I'm going to be late. So with that, stop you. We need to stop using the parental alienation word. If we just stop using the parental alienation word, that will force us to use different words. And those different words are the established knowledge. The moment we do that, we actually get real diagnoses and real solutions. And so it's just critical. You just stop using that word. And all of a sudden, you're in a different position. There's a strategic family systems intervention that I kind of know. It's structural is Minuchin. There's strategic. There's Haley and Madonna's. And I love it. It's really good. It looks at power dynamics. And what you do is you come up with a prescriptive intervention that if the client just does what you tell them to do, everything's going to change because it's going to change the power dynamic. ABPA is a strategic intervention. If you just do it, if you just collect those 3 symptoms on every case routinely, everything will change. Everything. You don't even have to know why it's going to change. It will change because it's going to shift around the power dynamics. It's going to do things that you don't recognize it's doing, and everything will come into place. And so it's similar to stop using parental alienation. If you stop using that word, if you just do that, everything will change, and you won't even have to know why it changes. Okay. So parental alienation was developed by one guy. Okay, Richard Gardner, a psychiatrist, an MD psychiatrist, has no training in psychology. He went to medical school. He didn't go to psychology school. He skipped the step of diagnosis and thought he was grandiose enough to develop his own special, unique pathology, unique in all of mental health, with unique new symptoms. And he sends everyone off the rails for 40 years. 40 years fighting around this one person's proposal, and nobody applied the established knowledge. It took Dr. Childress dropping in from the outside, boop, to come in and say, why don't you just diagnose it and treat it? There's a diagnosis. Here's your treatment. Nobody wants to. It's a motivational issue. I'll end on this. This is a motivational pathology. Attachment system is a motivation system, primary motivation system of the brain. The pathology, the damaged information structures in the attachment networks, have access to our motivations. They move us, they motivate us. The child, if you look at the child's attachment bond problems, that's a problem in motivation. The motivations are totally messed up. They should be bonding to the mother. They should want the mother, father, love, and stuff. Instead, they reject. That's a motivational issue. The surrounding people, the forensic people, they don't want to solve it. Okay, they're getting $20,000 to $40,000 for 6 to 9 months of doing nothing. And if the clinical people believe because it's so dangerous, then who actually comes here? The worst. The only people that come, the forensic psychologists, are the ones who are willing to accept the risk for the payoff, the big $20,000 to $40,000, and they usually do big custody evaluations to keep themselves safe. And so they have no motivation to change. They're perfectly fine. The Gardnerian folks, they're experts, and they're getting their clients, and they're testifying in it because of parental alienation, and they're on their good cause, and they have their whole thing. They have no motivation to change. So neither of your psychology people want to change anything. And that's what I've documented up over the last 10 years. I've given plenty of opportunity. I spoke to the AFCC. I spoke to the petition to the APA. Then they shifted over to Deutsch and the forensic psychologists, and dies in committee. And so no one wants to solve this because there are entrenched issues within psychology on that. That's why we need the APA. We need outside independent review, because where's the licensing boards? Licensing boards, every case that you file into a licensing board gets referred to a forensic psychologist because they're a subspecialty, and they all do the same thing, so they're all covering up for themselves. The forensic psychology boards are corrupt. We need outside independent review of forensic psychology, your own special psychologists. We need that either from the APA, or from the courts in malpractice lawsuits, or from the legislature to look at the licensing boards. One of these outside folks has to come in and look at the cesspool of forensic psychology in the family courts. In the meantime, I'm just out here. Basically, my career right now is living off the malpractice of forensic psychologists. And so I can do this forever. Okay, get cases, generate the malpractice lawsuits, generate the board complaints, and we can do this for 10 years. I'm fine doing that. I'm making money. So I will live off the malpractice of the forensic psychologists until they stop, until they actually want to solve something. Let me tell you, all it'll take is one malpractice lawsuit that's successful. One malpractice, get your test case, bring it up, one malpractice lawsuit, it becomes a Tarasoff type example, failure in the duty to protect, the entire field shifts immediately, okay, to established criteria and stuff. And if once you start doing the malpractice lawsuits, then that's going to send a chill through everybody, and they're going to do risk management responses. My cuckoo clocks are going off. Final thing just about my little studio here. So I'm going to have a different little area to do my YouTubes. I brought you into my painting corner, my painting nook. I got a little painting going. Hopefully, because I haven't worked on this in like 6 months, but now if I invite you in every week, you're going to have to see like progress on my paintings. Otherwise, I'm going to be like, oh, in trouble. So I just brought you into my little nook here for Saturday mornings, coffee and crumpets with Dr. Childress. Now I've got to run because I'm so late. So it's good talking to everybody. Thank you to Suze. Good luck down there in Florida. So